it's Nichol Spohr for Simon Says Stamp, and today we're going to be creating some quilt backgrounds with pattern paper using components from the Simon Says Stamp May 2022 card kit called Brushed Flowers. We're going to be using a lot of the Prima pattern paper included in the kit, as well as the Brushed Flowers stamp set, cardstocks, and all of that good stuff. And then I am using the Simon Says Stamp geometric square builder dies, these are the builder squares, pardon me, to create these quilt backgrounds for slimline style cards. I trimmed some white cardstock from the kit to 3 by 6 inches. I found that this worked really well as the geometric builder squares, each square measures 1.5 inches. And so I could do 2 3-inch blocks, quilt blocks, for my backgrounds if I was going to do a mini slimline style card. And what I did was I took the Prima pattern paper included in the kit. I had some left over from some previous cards I created, and then I had a few other sheets, and I basically used almost everything except maybe part of one sheet included in the kit to die cut all of these patterns to build my quilt blocks. I am a quilter, so some of this was kind of fun to just figure out how to make these quilt blocks with the pattern paper I had. And I tried to incorporate florals from the pattern papers into my quilt blocks, as well as use some of the more basic patterns like this little check print here, so that the actual floral and patterns would really pop. It was also a challenge with some of the pattern paper I had left, to figure out how to piece it together so that I could have patterns with what I had left. I didn't have a ton of a couple of the patterns, and so I had to be a little creative with how I use this. I am using, let's see, I think about 5 of the geometric builder squares in all 3 cards. While I had all of the components out, I did go ahead and make multiple cards. I thought it was super fun to just kind of, like I said, find creative ways to combine the different shapes into these quilt blocks. Now, unfortunately on this first background, I did not get everything laid down exactly the way I needed to. You'll notice I'm using this Spellbinders Tool-in-One, that little sharp angled tip to pop those up and put them back down. I put some strong adhesive all over my 3 by 6 inch panel before placing the pieces down. I have laid them out prior to adhering them to the panel, so I knew what order to place them in. This is probably my favorite background I made. I believe this is called the Ohio Star. I think there's some people call blocks different names, but that's what I was going for here. And it uses just 2 pattern papers, this beautiful blue pattern paper, and then the orange with the little white for that grid style pattern. And I simply made 2 blocks to fill the entire mini slimline. These floral pattern papers are gorgeous. Prima is really kind of known for that. And like I said, I wanted to make the pattern paper from the May card kit really, really shine. And I'm going to continue adding all of the little bits and pieces. I did speed up adhering all of the pattern paper to the background just so that we're not sitting here forever. It did take a few minutes to arrange it. An embellishment wand helps. Tweezers would also be a great tool with all these little bits and pieces. You could do this out of solid cardstock or other pattern papers from your stash. It was really just kind of a great little stash buster for all of the leftover pattern paper I had from the kit. I will need to adjust this. I noticed that my rectangle wasn't coming out perfect, and so I ended up just placing my square down, and then I'm going to take my paper trimmer and square up my my panel or my block. I have to do that with quilting sometimes too. So it wasn't a huge surprise. Now this is probably the easiest. It uses only one of the dies from the Geometric Builder squares, and it's simply flipping two different pattern papers. This is another example of only two pattern papers, and making stripes on the quilt. And I love how this one turned out. Definitely the easiest one, but super, super pretty. The teal with that kind of, or the aqua, I guess, with the teal and then floral print is really beautiful. Once we have our backgrounds all together, I decided that in addition to the greetings we're going to stamp and emboss, I want to add some florals from the Brushed Flowers stamp set included in this month's kit. You can get the dies as an add-on purchase. And I'm going to stamp all of these with some of my favorite Simon Says stamp Pawsitively saturated ink. So I'm using Sprout, Field, and Fairway for these first couple greens. I stamped my image first with Sprout ink a couple of times, and then I'm taking a Simon Says stamp ink blending tool with the Field ink and adding a little bit of that color to my stamp before stamping it again on the cardstock. I'll flip or rotate my cardstock and stamp it again. You're going to see this a lot. I'm going to rotate the cardstock and then I will stamp the image again because I want the same images for all three cards. Then I did flip my panel over and I stamped it in the opposite corner. I just need to remember when I'm stamping that I am stamping on the back side of the cardstock as well. I wanted to use every little bit and piece of this white cardstock. Now you do get some white cardstock in the kit. However, I used it for the backgrounds for my 3x6 cards. So I grabbed a little bit more cardstock from my stash for my stamped images. I love adding extra color to a solid stamped image. It gives a lot of depth and dimension. Next, we're going to cut the little flower, or pardon me, stamp the little flower here. And another leaf. I went ahead and grabbed two of them at once. I'm going to stamp the flower bud with melon and then pounce on a little cantaloupe ink for a two-tone flower. Very much like the leaf before, we're doing the same sort of technique, which gives you a little bit more shading, depth, and dimension to your finished image. And we'll flip it over to the back and stamp this again. Now I did switch up the color because on one of my backgrounds there's not really any orange. So I'm going to stamp the flower with pinks for my final image. So be aware of the background and what colors you're using to make sure it's going to coordinate with your card. I'm using Carnation and Peony for my third little bud here. For the other greenery, we're going to use Fairway and Field Pawsitively saturated inks. So for the first leafy branch, we use Sprout and Fairway, and now we're going to switch to Fairway and Field. I wanted a little bit of difference in the leaves that I'm using, the leaves and branches I'm using for each card. We'll use a completely different green color combination for our final leafy branch here in a bit. I think that's the last thing I stamped for this card design. I want about 3 flowers and 3 green leafy pieces per card. Now, if you don't want to add any extra embellishment to your card, you could very easily leave off this extra step and just let the quilted backgrounds stand on their own. I just wanted a little bit extra embellishment, especially for a couple of the cards, maybe this more stripy one, the aqua one, as I felt like it didn't have quite as much going on. I'm using Surf and Royal for the little blue flower. All 3 cards will feature this. Surf first, we'll pounce on a little Royal and stamp that again. For our third flower, I'm going to stamp 2 of them in pink We're going to go back to Carnation and Peony like we did for the small flower. But for the final flower, the problem is I've already done a pink flower for the small little bud. And so I decided to do some reds. So it went with that card design a little bit better because I don't want to do orange for that particular card design, which I'll show you here in a second. And I'm looking through my cardstock to make sure I'm not overlapping since I'm using both the front and the back here. I was having to be really creative with how I stamped this. You could make this easy on yourself and use a separate sheet of cardstock. I guess I was making it hard. Again, this is going to be Carnation and Peony. And we're going to take the Peony ink with our ink blending tool and pounce that in the middle to make the center of our flower a little darker. You could even maybe do more of a red in the center to make that darker, even darker and more shading. And then we're going to switch to a red color combination for our flower on the back. And that's going to be in the red color family. So I'm just checking. I don't want to accidentally stamp a flower. So I'm moving my stamp just a little bit. And let's grab our red inks. And that's some watermelon and cherry. These are just beautiful red colors. I really love these. For our final leafy branch, we're going to go with some sage and pine. This is a completely different green color combination, and so it'll add a little bit of richness as well as a difference between the other leaves. Same as before, we'll stamp the leaf or branch with sage, the lighter color ink, and then we're going to pounce on the pine ink to deepen and darken certain areas. I am going to move this stamp each time just to fill in the rest of the cardstock. I'm going to take the coordinating dies, die cut these, and then we're going to stamp some sentiments for our card design. I'm going to take some leftover black cardstock from the kit. I've already used a little bit of it for some previous cards, but I have about a quarter of that cardstock panel left. I'm going to prep it with a powder tool and then taking thank you sentiments from the brushed flower stamp set, we're going to stamp thank you multiple times, and then we're going to stamp for everything twice and for being a friend once. That's going to give us sentiments for all 3 cards. So I'm just going to figure out my placement, prep my cardstock with a powder tool, stamp it with embossing and watermark ink, and then heat emboss with white embossing powder. The black cardstock will really show up against the very colorful and busy backgrounds. Once I've heat embossed the greetings, I'm going to die cut them with my favorite Simon Says Stamp Sentiment Labels dies. You can see that I die cut all of them and they are ready to go. Laying out the brushed flowers on my background panels to figure out the perfect placement, and then I'm going to figure out where to place my greetings. Once I have everything kind of laid out where I think it's going to look best, it's time to start putting it all together. I'll start by gluing down the longer leafy branches first. I'll take a little bit of liquid adhesive, pop those in place, tuck in some flowers, and then we will place our sentiment strip down along the bottom edge of our leaves, kind of covering up so that it looks like our flower arrangement is coming up from our sentiment. We'll attach our sentiment strips with foam adhesive. I'm using a little waffle flower foam adhesive strips for this. I like how it really grounds the brushed flower images, and you can just kind of pop them up from that. I want to tuck some of the flowers into the greenery back behind leaves to give it a more natural look. Now our background panels, remember, measure 3 by 6, or maybe slightly smaller if I had to trim off some of the sides to kind of even them up and square them up. You want to make sure that they're going to fit your mini slimline card bases. I will be using mini slimline card bases from Simon Says Stamp. I love their pre-cut and scored cards. I will tell you I trimmed them down just a little bit on the long tall side so that my background panels fit perfectly. It was barely like 1/8 of an inch maybe, so not a ton, just enough so that it left the same size white border all the way around the perimeter of my card panel. We'll finish adding these last few pieces and then place these on our mini slimline card bases. Simon Says Stamp has a fantastic array of mini slimline colorful envelopes that will perfectly match your cards as well, so definitely check that out. You could even stamp some of the brushed flowers on those mini envelopes if you wanted to make a matching set. Thank you guys so much for joining me today for these quilted backgrounds out of pattern paper using components from the Simon Says Stamp May 2022 card kit called Brushed Flowers. The supplies I used are listed and linked below the video here on YouTube for your convenience. Thank you guys so much for joining me today, and we'll see you next time.